Our next talk is by two people from Allegion PLC. Cindy Farrer is the Vice President of Global Supply Chain Management, and Tim McDonnell is the Director of Global Supply Strategy and Risk Management. And in Cindy's resume, I couldn't help but announce, and I've never had this opportunity, to announce a person who won the Women in Manufacturing Step Award, the Shingo Prize for Manufacturing Excellence, and the Donald J. Almquist Award for Extraordinary Accomplishment. Plus, she's an IE. Go IE. Okay. So thank you, Cindy.
Right, Dr. Lee?
Tim is the Director of Global Supply Strategy and Risk Management of Allegion. Prior to that, he'd been associated with Ford, Trane, Ingersoll Rand, etc. So one of the things I didn't know Allegion was Ingersoll Rand Security Technologies, because before you became Allegion. So I'm going to let them take over, and I think if I just move this over, I think we're in business.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Tim.
All righty. All right, very good. Good afternoon, everyone. We are very glad to be here today for this conference. Actually, this topic of supply chain risk is very, very important, and it's top of mind to us at Allegion. And so when we saw this conference, we were thrilled to be here and also excited to get to share with you some of the work that we're doing at Allegion on this topic. And it's interesting because it began about a year ago, partnering with a student group out of this program. And so we'll share a little bit about what we're doing there. Let me begin with just a little bit about Allegion. I'll kind of go through a few of these slides here. We're basically about a $2.3 billion company that builds architectural hardware and security systems, where our official headquarters is in Dublin, Ireland, but our executive team resides here in Carmel, Indiana. We are global. We've got roughly 30 plants globally, a large quantity here in the Americas, even in the United States. Our revenue is about 70% Americas-based, about 20% Europe-based, and about 10% Asia-Pacific-based. We're constantly growing. We're very acquisitory. So we've got upwards of 30 brands. Some of them you may have heard of, Schlage. You actually heard of one this morning that Dr. Anant didn't realize, because Kryptonite is part of Allegion. It's part of our legacy. Besides security systems for buildings, we also have a business unit that's on portable security, which would include bike locks. So again, this topic of supply risk is very important to us. As Dr. Anant said, my responsibility is leading the Global Supply Management Organization, which consists of about a $1.1 billion annual spend, over 1,000 direct suppliers and several thousand indirect suppliers. And so this topic of managing supply risk is what we do every day. Actually, Tim and I, that's just constant. And actually, over the last several years, I would say the risk that we've been facing has increased. There's been a number of different things that we've been working on, and it really kind of came front and center that we need to become more proactive in identifying risk and looking at ways that we can mitigate it. So we actually kind of started working on putting together an approach to address risk. And we've already kind of talked about, when you talk about risk, the types of things we could be talking about, facility shutdowns, bankruptcies, et cetera. But what the risk to our business is affecting our production capability, affecting our ability to service our customers, our reputation in the field, and just market share overall. So it's very critical. Some of the risks that we're facing right now at this time, I know there's been a lot of discussion today on hurricanes. Obviously, that seems to be a big deal for a lot of people. The hurricanes last year impacted us at Allegion also. The Hurricane Harvey in Houston, all of our polystyrene packaging suppliers, coincidentally, are based there, so we found ourselves with difficulty getting polystyrene. But just some of the other things, these are things we are facing right now, dealing with today, trying to keep our supply chain going. And for example, we have a big portion of our business that's electronic locks and electronic security systems, so we depend on electronic components. If you go back a year and a half ago, typical lead time might have been 12 weeks, which to us was too long to begin with. But there is currently a worldwide shortage of components: resistors, capacitors, diodes, memory devices, you name it, connectors, harnesses, everything. All of our worldwide circuit board suppliers are reporting this. Lead times have gone up to 40, 45 weeks. Our business is primarily make to order, so we try to forecast. We do forecast, but you can't forecast exactly. So this is an example of a risk that we have had to get very focused and proactive on mitigating to be able to service our customers. Some other examples, if you look at packaging, look at everybody's buying things on Amazon. I see you've got the Amazon Service Center down there. I mean, none of us go to retail anymore and purchase it. Everything's ordered and delivered. Well, what's that doing? That's consuming cardboard, and that's driving up the price of cardboard. We talked about natural events already. Another big item for us is commodity prices. We use a lot of steel, aluminum, zinc. Politically right now, there's a ruling that's underway called Section 232. Some of you may know about it, where President Trump may opt to charge tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. We're watching that closely. If that happens, that will increase our prices for a lot of our supply chain. It'll increase prices that we buy direct. It'll change the whole market dynamics. That's one we know of. There's things we don't know of. There's always been regulation in China around environmental constraints, but there became a much bigger crackdown on it. We get a lot of plated parts from China, and all of a sudden, our suppliers could not deliver because their factories were being shut down, or we got big price increases because they had to add millions of dollars of wastewater treatment to their facilities to be able to supply us. That's the type of thing we couldn't see coming. And then just this whole thing of supplier relationship performance challenge. Something that really hit us last year is we had one of our longtime suppliers that supplied $5 million of revenue to us, or spend to us a year, but it serviced about $200 million of our shipments that came in and told us he decided he didn't want to do business anymore. He just wanted to exit the business. Those are the types of things, we were caught by surprise. We didn't have a backup. How quickly can we react? These are the types of things that put our business at risk. So when we talk about supply chain management and managing supply risk, this is the kind of risk that we need to be able to manage. So last year, we actually had done some things, but we formally partnered with a group here from Purdue and gave them this assignment. We want you guys to help us get started with the program here, and they did a fantastic job. The deliverables we asked them for, what are others doing? What are some best practices that you see? Look at our business and help us identify what are key risk categories, and how can we sort of assign risk and look at what the risk levels are. We asked them to help us develop a supplier scorecard for us and look at our supply base and help us know, based on what you can tell, what is the risk that you can see with our top suppliers, and then help us get this implemented. And so, like I said, they did a fantastic job. I'm going to turn it over to Tim, and he's going to talk to you about where we're at with that process.
Thank you. Starting this morning, about 6-7 hours ago, with Gary talking about the process that people go through, or how you may want to structure a risk process, all the way through to Tom, the last speaker. There's been examples given of how the types of risks, the impact of risk that it has on the business, whether it's your internal customer or the external customer, and how do you manage through that. I think what we're going to share here with you a little bit is our little story, kind of a living case study of how we approached the actual application of trying to take the thought processes and how we applied them, the different categories that are out there in risk and what they mean to our business. And it's still ongoing. It's still a living case study for the most part, but that's kind of what you're going to see here is what have we done to try and manage through and communicate real well with our internal business partners and our customers. So we've started the effort in 2 areas, and the reason it was 2 areas is because really internally one started earlier than the other, and we haven't been able to catch up yet to make them together. But the first area was born from our supplier performance management. How can we help our supply base better understand their performance? And it evolved into, at the same time, how do we measure the operating risk that our suppliers and our supply base from a performance standpoint impact? And then how do we communicate that risk to our business partners? And so that has a lot to do with the quality of the delivery, the responsiveness of our supply base when something happens that's wrong, how well they deliver on time, the value they provide, do we have a contract with them? Very much performance metrics. And the second one has to do a little bit more with some of the speakers we heard about talk about supply chain design and our suppliers themselves. How robust and how healthy are our suppliers from a financial standpoint? What are the economic conditions that they operate under? Are we sole-sourced or single-sourced with our supply base, and do we have any alternatives if something should happen? So that has to do with more of the bottom piece, the risk scorecard. And to give a perspective as to where we were coming from a baseline, Most of what we have done in the past, being a spinoff from a larger company, was really managed by experience and tribal knowledge. Being able to start quantifying information, gathering data, was something that we had to pretty much relearn as we spun off and had our own data systems to create and manage. Relating the last slide with this slide is we looked at what's important to our business, and so these are arbitrary numbers, but according to us and our business partners, we placed value on how much those operating risk categories would weigh into a scorecard for our supply base. You know, the value that they provide and the quality and the delivery, your basic three main metrics that you use for your supply base, make up about 75% of their performance. The other part of it, the risk piece of it, we developed those 8 metrics. There's many more out there, and there's many other solutions. This was, just ours, the way we approached it, so doesn't make it right or wrong, but it fits with our business. It was important to figure out how do we measure those type of things that are a little bit more soft. How do you put a hard number on the financial health of a company or the economic conditions that they operate under or where they're located? So that was our biggest challenge, was to take those categories and make them very measurable so that it's not subjective, where if a person comes into a position to manage a category, they may feel differently than the previous person they replaced, and all of a sudden an inconsistent message is communicated to our supply base. So being able to measure these things consistently so we have a lot of good continuity to our suppliers is important, as well as to how we communicate to our business partners and our internal plant customers. So we developed the 8 categories, and what I will take you through is probably an example of one, because we wanted to make sure these were all very measurable. We also wanted to be able to weight them and to, again, explain to our internal customers what they mean, how they can be applied, and really try to understand the tolerance of risk that we have as a company as a result of our supply chain design. Because we don't have a baseline. We don't know. We've just always sort of done things. And so all of a sudden introducing some good metrics, which is what we all want to do, it also starts to hopefully generate some questions about, is this a risk level that we feel comfortable with? And any decisions we make from a business standpoint should work to probably improve the risk as well as drive the other performance metrics in our company. So financial, economic, legal measures the robustness of the supply base in terms of whether or not they can impact us from any legal issues that they have. Regulatory is how well that a supply base is managing the requirements that we have to adhere to from a regulatory standpoint, whether it's the anti-human trafficking or whether it's the material that we have in our products, making sure that they're conforming to the requirements around the world. Geopolitical is the geopolitical environment by which the region or the country the supplier is located and operates in. Availability of supply is probably the most critical on the list. Are we single source or sole source from a design? How flexible are we in terms of being able to replace the supply if something happens, if there's a disruption? Natural disaster, we've covered that quite a bit here today. And then contract, how robust is our contract with our supply base? When we think about how we implement business processes, we start with the basics. And so right now we're at very much an Excel-based type of approach. Once we've proven out the Excel-based approach, we will move it into our operating system and hopefully automate it further. But right now, before we believe in automating things, we try to prove out the business process. The way that we envision that the scorecard looks, and the way it actually looks today, is you have a number of suppliers, and you have the risks by each of the categories based on the weights that have been assigned, based on the metrics that we measure our supply base on. This enables us to look at our supply base robustly from a single score, or it enables us to look at different categories and start to look at advanced analytics or analytics that say, what-if scenarios. For example, we would want to know how many suppliers are located in a high-risk geographic region that we don't have a contract with and that we don't have a good backup supply or backup supply base. Taking the different categories and running a quick pivot or filter would show us that answer and give us how many suppliers, who are they, and what categories are they in, so that we can at least start the thought process of mitigating and taking action if we choose to about what we'd want to do. And that's the ultimate goal, really, is to partner with our internal business partners, our P&L leaders, and our plant operations to express to them what are the risks that we see, where are they, what categories, and what does it mean for our business moving forward. So I'll use this as an example. There's, I think, a few that I put up here, but for the most part, as we think about trying to identify robust metrics and make sure that they're clean, we chose to measure financial health through one of our rating systems that we use as a partner to look at the scores in terms of how they are measured in terms of the risk there. It's something that we can apply across all of our supply base worldwide so that we can get a normalized score amongst our suppliers and be able to prioritize. If we aren't able to find the information through that partner, because a number of our suppliers are private companies, business entrepreneurs that have their own business, and public information may not be available, we would ask them for their financial information. And if they were able to provide us, we'd be able to at least have a good, robust look at it. Understanding that many companies don't like to share that, we've chosen to rate them a certain rating, and that would then go into the overall metric for a supplier. And we followed this process for all the different categories, where we were able to look at a question that should give us a very straightforward answer, somewhat very quickly and efficiently, and scorecard it. We've certainly looked at where there's more advanced and more sophisticated type of metrics that are out there as far as looking at information, and we certainly have a vision of where we want to take it. But for this starting point right now, in our maturity, this seems to be the one that was most comfortable for us. And then this just illustrates, based on the different answers, we've got matrices set up that we, for the most part, will print out an answer. It'll give a score and it'll give a color rating for that supplier for that category. And we've done that for the remaining categories that you saw there of those 8. And I'm not going to go through all of these. The regulatory has to do with, again, specific material requirements that we adhere to, as well as the legislation requirements that are becoming much more prevalent around the world in anti-human trafficking and child labor. And a lot of that has to align with our values as a company, making sure that our suppliers adhere to the same values that we practice as our own company in Allegion. So we assign the different weightings. Those are arbitrary, again, based on feedback from our internal business partners. One of the advantages, or one of the thoughts that we had, is that as situations change around the world, we can change those. So if there's an economic downturn and the financial health of the supply base becomes more important, we can very easily pivot and change the weighting of the financial aspect to drive the fact that now that is a more important risk category than it maybe would be today. But the availability of supply and having the backup supply, being able to replenish or replace a supplier quickly is important, as well as financial, and those two really make up almost 50%, or a little bit more than 50% of the risk that we see in our supply base. And just to give a little bit of more background on the availability of supply, we have, since we're a make-to-order type business model, the number of SKUs that could be made or placed by our customers is in the large number of millions. It's not easy to replace a supplier that may supply us with 1,000 or 2,000 different parts very easily because of the make-to-order type of a business model that we employ. Again, example of what the scorecard looks like. It's something that we manage. We will manage it on an annual basis from a published standpoint, but on a regular monthly or quarterly basis, we will go through and manage the scorecard with the data as it becomes available in the different categories. So it gives us an opportunity to understand what's happening throughout the year. Cindy's team, which I'm part of, our commodity managers, they manage this. This is one of their tools as they start to drive supplier performance. They can use that in their conversations with suppliers and now have a good conversation about risk and what it means to our company. And one of the outcomes that we look at, we start looking at what the reports look like and how do we envision to communicate to our internal business partners would be, and this is one example, would be to start to look at your standard 4-block measurement tool. How do you communicate very clearly with our supply base, with your suppliers that are performing really well? The x-axis is that performance metric, so that the higher the number, the better the supplier's performing, which is good. The y-axis is risk. The higher the number, the higher the risk of that supplier. So the different quadrants would be a supplier performing very well that's of low risk, a supplier that's performing very well, but for some reason there's some risk associated with it, a supplier that's not much risk, but their performance is not very good, so corrective actions would be taken. And then the upper left quadrant, not performing well, and also a high risk, those would be the ones that would be on a watch list that say, okay, these are the ones we would really want to take action against. Each quadrant allows us to now start asking questions and start tailoring solutions that are not just a peanut butter spread across the supply base, but more focused on what is the risk that we're seeing and how do we mitigate it through action.